collectivists and individualists both agree that human rights are important, but they differ over how important compared to other values, and especially over the origin of those rights. Rights are not tangible entities that can be viewed or measured. They are abstract concepts held in the human mind. They are whatever men agree they are at a given time and place. Because of the great diversity in the concept of human rights, they cannot be defined to everyone's satisfaction. But if we wish to live in a culture with the optimum amount of personal freedom, then we must be serious about a preferred definition of human rights. Because if we have no concept of what our rights should be, then it is likely that we will live under a definition not to our liking. The first thing to understand as we work towards a useful definition of rights is that their source determines their nature. This will be covered in greater detail further along, but the concept needs to be stated here. If we can agree on a source of rights, then we will have little difficulty agreeing on their nature. For example, if a security guard is hired by a gated community to protect the property of its residents, the nature of the guard's activity must be limited to the activities that the residents themselves are entitled to perform. That means the guard may patrol the community and, if necessary, physically deter burglaries and crimes of aggressive violence. But the guard is not authorized to compel residents to send their children to bed by 10 PM or to donate to the Red Cross. Why not? Because the residents are the source of the authority. The nature of the authority cannot include any act that is denied to the source, and the residents have no right to compel their neighbours in these matters. In societies that have been sheltered for many generations from war and revolution, it is easy to forget that rights are derived from military power. That is their ultimate source. Initially, rights must be earned on the battlefield. They may be handed to the next generation as a gift, but they are always purchased on the battlefield. The Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution is a classic example. The men who drafted that document were able to do so only because they represented the colonists who defeated the armies of Great Britain. Had they lost the War of Independence, they would have had no opportunity to write a Bill of Rights or anything else except letters of farewell before their execution. Unfortunately, Mao Zedong was right when he said that political power grows from the barrel of a gun. He could just as well have said rights. A man may declare that he has a right to do such and such derived from law or from a constitution or even from God, but in the presence of a criminal or a tyrant with a gun to his head, he has no power to exercise his proclaimed right. Rights are always based on power. If we lose our ability or our willingness to physically defend our rights, we will lose them. Now we come to the chasm between collectivists and individualists. If rights are earned on the battlefield, we may assume that they belong to the winners, but who are they? Do governments win wars, or do the people? If governments win wars and the people merely serve them, as in medieval times, then governments hold the rights and are entitled to grant or deny them to the people. On the other hand, if people win wars and governments merely serve them in this matter, then the people hold rights and are entitled to grant or deny them to governments. If our task is to define rights as we think they should be in a free society, then we must choose between these two concepts. Collectivists choose the concept that rights come from governments and that people are the servants. Individualists are nervous about this assumption because if the state has the power to grant rights, it also has the power to take them away, and that concept is incompatible with personal liberty. The view of individualism was expressed clearly in the United States Declaration of Independence, which said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." The assumption is that rights are the innate possession of the people. The purpose of government is not to grant rights, but to secure them and protect them. By contrast, all collectivist political systems embrace the opposite view, that rights are granted by the state. That includes the Nazis, fascists, and communists. It is also a tenet of the United Nations. Article 4 of the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights says, "The states parties to the present covenant recognize that, in the enjoyment of those rights provided by the state may subject such rights only to such limitations as are determined by law." I repeat, if we accept that the state has the power to grant rights, then we must also agree that it has the power to take them away. Notice the wording of the UN Covenant. After proclaiming that rights are provided by the state, it then says that those rights may be subject to limitations as are determined by law. In other words, the collectivists at the United Nations presume to grant us our rights, and then, when they are ready to take them away, all they have to do is pass a law authorizing it. Compare that with the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. It says that Congress shall pass no law restricting the rights of freedom of speech or religion, peaceful assembly, the right to bear arms and so forth, not except as are determined by law, but no law. The United States Constitution embodies the ethic of individualism. The UN embodies the ethic of collectivism, and what a difference it makes. We can see that individualists believe that the state cannot have any legitimate powers unless they are given it by the citizens. Another way of putting it is that governments may only do those things that their citizens also have a right to do. If individuals don't have a right to perform a certain act, then they can't grant that power to their elected representatives. They can't delegate what they don't have. It makes no matter how many of them there may be. If none of them have a specified power to delegate, then 1 million of them don't have it either. Let us use an extreme example of 3 men afloat at sea struggling over a piece of debris that will only support 2 of them. Both collectivists and individualists would say that the 2 men would be justified in overpowering the 3rd. The collectivist points out the greater good for the greater number. However, if we simplify the example so that there are only 2 men and the debris will only support 1 of them, we can see that an individual would still be justified in overpowering the other, because the right to self-survival is paramount. We can see that in the original example, there is no need for any group right to justify overpowering the 3rd individual. When each man acts, they do it for their own individual right of self-survival. Using physical force to protect our lives, liberty, and property is the legitimate function of government, because that power is derived from the people as individuals. It does not arise from the group. Here's a more typical example. If government officials decide one day that no one should work on a Sunday, and even assuming the community generally supports their decision, where would they get the authority to use the police power of the state to enforce such a decree? Individual citizens don't have a right to compel their neighbours not to work, so they can't delegate that right to their governments. So where then would the state get the authority? The answer is that it would come from itself. It would be self-generated. When governments claim to derive their authority from any source other than the governed, it always leads to the destruction of liberty. Preventing men from working on a Sunday would not seem to be a great threat to freedom, but once the principle is established, it opens the door for more edicts, and more, until freedom is gone. If we accept that the state or any group has the right to do things that individuals alone do not have the right to do, then we have unwittingly endorsed the concept that rights are not intrinsic to the individual, and that they in fact do originate with the state. Once we accept that, we are on the road to tyranny. As we shall see in part 2, collectivists are not concerned over such picky issues. They believe that governments do in fact have powers that are greater than those of the citizens, and the source of those powers, they say, is not the individuals in society, but society itself.